Berlin, 2024. 3 in the morning. Apartment dark except for the pale glow of a phone screen illuminating a face from below. The person scrolling cannot remember when they picked up the device. 5 minutes ago. An hour? The videos blend together productivity hacks, morning routines of successful people, meditations on self-optimization, advertisements for courses on time management, influencers explaining how they maintain work-life balance while working 16-hour days. The exhaustion is profound. Not the exhaustion of physical labor, the body barely moved today, just sat at a desk, then sat on a couch, now lies in bed. This is different. A fatigue that sleep doesn't cure. A weariness that no amount of rest seems to touch. The kind of tiredness that comes from being always available, always productive, always positive, always on. Tomorrow there will be more emails to answer, more projects to optimize, more metrics to track, more content to consume and produce, more self-improvement to pursue. The to-do list never ends. Even leisure has become work tracking steps, monitoring sleep quality, gamifying reading, optimizing social connections. There is no space that isn't colonized by the imperative to achieve, to improve, to maximize. The scrolling continues. A meditation app notification suggests it's time to practice mindfulness. A productivity app reminds that tomorrow's goals haven't been set. A fitness tracker notes that daily movement targets weren't met. Even rest has become performance. Even doing nothing requires optimization. This is not dramatic suffering. There are no oppressors, no chains, no visible coercion. This person is free to work as much as they want, free to answer emails at any hour, free to pursue endless self-improvement, free to be entrepreneurial with their own life. The exploitation is voluntary. The exhaustion is self-imposed. The burnout is achievement. In a small office at the University of the Arts in Berlin, a philosopher named Byung-Chul Han has been writing about exactly this. Not in the language of self-help or therapeutic intervention, but in the stark terms of philosophical diagnosis. He calls it the burnout society, the achievement subject, the violence of positivity, the dictatorship of transparency, the hell of the same. Han's work is not popular in the usual sense. He writes dense philosophical essays, references Heidegger and Baudrillard, publishes slim books with German academic publishers. Yet his ideas circulate widely, translated into dozens of languages, discussed in articles about work culture and digital life, recognized by exhausted people who find in his philosophy a name for their unnamed condition. He argues that we have moved from a disciplinary society where external forces control and punish to an achievement society where we control and punish ourselves. The master is gone, but the exploitation intensified. We have internalized the master, become our own slave drivers, and called this progress. We have confused freedom with the freedom to exploit ourselves. The person scrolling at 3 in the morning embodies Han's thesis perfectly. No one forces them to keep working, keep optimizing, keep scrolling. They do it freely. And this freedom, Han suggests, is the most effective form of domination yet devised. To understand how we arrived here, how freedom became exhaustion, how positivity became violence, how transparency became tyranny, we must understand the philosopher who diagnosed it, and the peculiar path that brought him from Seoul to Berlin, from metallurgy to Heidegger, from silence to one of the most incisive voices analyzing contemporary life. We live in the age of exhaustion. Not the exhaustion of physical labor though that persists, but a new form of tiredness that seems essential to contemporary existence. The burnout epidemic, the attention crisis, the impossibility of rest, the feeling that no matter how much we accomplish, it's never enough. The symptoms are everywhere. Emails answered at midnight, work never actually ending, the pressure to constantly self-brand and self-promote, social media's endless performance of happiness, the transformation of every hobby into a side hustle, the guilt that accompanies any moment not spent productively. We are tired of being tired, yet cannot stop the behaviors that exhaust us. Traditional political and psychological frameworks struggle to explain this condition. It's not oppression in any classic sense. No one forces us to work weekends or check email obsessively. It's not capitalist exploitation in the traditional form. We often exploit ourselves more effectively than any boss could. It's not mental illness. Exactly, the exhaustion is too widespread, too structural, too built into how society functions. Byung-Chul Han offers a different diagnosis. A Korean-born philosopher working in Berlin, Han has spent 2 decades analyzing what he calls the Burnout society, the achievement subject, the violence of positivity. His work synthesizes continental philosophy Heidegger, Foucault, Baudrillard with acute observation of contemporary digital culture to argue that we're experiencing a fundamental transformation in how power operates. We have moved, Han argues, from disciplinary societies based on prohibition and punishment to achievement societies based on initiative and self-optimization. The subject is no longer the obedient subject who says, "I should," but the achievement subject who says, "I can." This sounds liberating. Han shows it's more oppressive. The disciplinary subject could eventually satisfy demands and rest. The achievement subject can never do enough. There's always more potential to actualize, more productivity to unlock, more optimization to pursue. This shift produces new forms of violence. The violence of positivity, where the imperative to be happy and productive becomes pathological. The violence of transparency, where constant exposure eliminates mystery and interiority. The violence of hyperattention, where contemplative depth is replaced by scattered distraction. These are not experienced as violence because they wear the mask of freedom, empowerment, and self-realization. Han's work resonates because it names something we're living through but lack language to describe. His books, The Burnout Society, The Transparency Society, Psychopolitics, The Disappearance of Rituals circulate among exhausted workers, burnt-out activists, overwhelmed students, anyone who senses that something fundamental has gone wrong with how we live, but can't quite articulate what. Yet Han himself remains somewhat mysterious. He gives few interviews, maintains minimal public presence, resists the self-promotion that characterizes contemporary intellectual life. His biography is sparse, his personal life opaque. This obscurity seems deliberate, a refusal of transparency, a preservation of the kind of distance and mystery his philosophy argues we've lost. To understand his thought requires understanding the unusual path that brought him to philosophy, from metalworking in Korea to phenomenology in Germany, from cultural outsider to one of the most penetrating analysts of the culture he entered. Seoul's shadow, Byung-Chul Han, was born in Seoul, South Korea, in 1959. This date matters. He came of age during South Korea's transformation from war-devastated nation to economic powerhouse, during the period when development wasn't aspiration but necessity, when work wasn't lifestyle choice but survival imperative. The Korea of Han's youth was authoritarian. Park Chung-hee's military dictatorship ruled from 1961 to 1979. Political dissent was suppressed. Economic development was pursued with single-minded intensity. The society was hierarchical, collectivist, oriented toward group harmony rather than individual expression. Success meant obedience, discipline, sacrifice of personal desires for family and nation. This was a disciplinary society in the classic sense. Rules were explicit, prohibitions were clear, punishment was real. The subject knew what was forbidden, what was required, where the boundaries lay. There was no freedom in the Western liberal sense, but there was a certain clarity. You knew what society demanded, knew the consequences of transgression. Han's family background remains largely opaque. He speaks little of his parents, his childhood, the specific circumstances of his upbringing. This silence is characteristic. Unlike many contemporary intellectuals who make their biography part of their brand, Han maintains distance. The personal is kept private. The thinker is separated from the thought. What we know is that he did not initially pursue philosophy or humanities. His education was technical, practical, oriented toward the kind of development Korea was pursuing. He studied metallurgy, the science of metals, their properties, their processing. This was respectable, useful, economically valuable. In a nation focused on industrial development, metallurgy was serious education. Metallurgy is a discipline of transformation, taking raw material and changing its properties through heat, pressure, combination. Perhaps there's a metaphor here for Han's later philosophical method, taking the raw material of contemporary culture and subjecting it to intellectual pressure until its hidden properties are revealed. But this is probably reading too much into an educational choice that was likely practical rather than symbolic. What changed? Why did someone studying metallurgy in Seoul end up becoming a philosopher in Berlin? The answer involves a displacement, geographical, cultural, linguistic, that seems central to Han's perspective. He did not develop his philosophy from within a tradition, but from the position of outsider, someone who came to Western culture with fresh eyes, without the blind spots that come from being native. In 1980, Han moved to Germany. He was 21 years old. The reasons for the move are unclear. He has not spoken publicly about what prompted the decision. Was it political? The desire to escape South Korea's authoritarian environment? Was it intellectual? The draw of German philosophy and education? Was it personal? Reasons he has chosen not to disclose? The motivation remains his secret. What's clear is that the move was radical. South Korea to Germany in 1980 meant moving between worlds, from Confucian East Asia to post-war Europe, from authoritarian developmentalism to liberal democracy, from Korean language and thought patterns to German. The cultural distance was vast. The linguistic challenge was immense. The experience of being perpetually foreign was guaranteed. Germany in 1980 was West Germany divided, still marked by war and reconstruction, in the middle of its own debates about memory, responsibility, identity. It was also a center of philosophical activity. Habermas was dominant. Critical theory was influential. Phenomenology had deep roots. The German philosophical tradition that Han would eventually master, Hegel, Nietzsche, Heidegger, was available in its original language. Han learned German, not just functional German for daily life, but philosophical German, the ability to read Heidegger's notoriously difficult prose, to engage with Hegel's dialectics, to follow the intricate arguments of the Frankfurt School. Learning philosophy in a second language is extraordinarily difficult. It requires not just vocabulary, but absorption of thought patterns, conceptual frameworks, cultural assumptions embedded in language itself. He enrolled at the University of Freiburg. Freiburg was significant. This was Heidegger's university, the city where Being and Time was written, where phenomenology had been developed. Though Heidegger had died in 1976, his presence still permeated the philosophy department. To study philosophy at Freiburg was to be immersed in a particular tradition, a particular way of thinking about being, time, existence. Han studied philosophy, German literature, and Catholic theology. The combination is interesting. Not just pure philosophy, but engagement with literature, the aesthetic dimension, and theology, questions of transcendence, meaning, the sacred. This interdisciplinary approach would characterize his later work, which moves fluidly between philosophy, cultural criticism, political analysis, aesthetic theory, the experience of learning in a second language, of being cultural outsider, of seeing German and European culture from the position of someone not entirely within it. This shaped Han's philosophical perspective fundamentally. He could see things that natives couldn't see, question assumptions that seemed natural to those raised within Western culture, notice patterns that were invisible to insiders. Korean culture, with its emphasis on collectivism, ritual, social harmony, provided contrast. When Han later critiques Western individualism, the narcissism of authenticity, the loss of ritual, he's drawing on lived experience of a different cultural logic. He's not romanticizing Korea. His work shows awareness of its problems, but using the comparison to make visible what Western culture takes for granted, the sense of being between cultures. Not fully Korean anymore, but never fully German, created a position of productive alienation. Han speaks and writes fluent German, has lived in Germany for over 40 years, knows German philosophy as deeply as any native. Yet he remains in some sense outside, maintaining distance, seeing with eyes that are not quite native. This position, insider and outsider simultaneously, is philosophically powerful. The complete insider cannot see their own culture clearly. It's too natural, too much the unquestioned background of thought. The complete outsider cannot understand deeply enough to critique effectively, but someone who has learned a culture thoroughly while retaining the perspective of having come from outside this person can achieve unusual clarity. Han's early work, his dissertation research, focused on Heidegger. This choice is revealing. Heidegger is notoriously difficult, dense, idiosyncratic, creating his own philosophical vocabulary. He's also controversial, his involvement with Nazism, creating ongoing debate about whether his philosophy is separable from his politics. To choose Heidegger as focus required intellectual ambition and willingness to engage with uncomfortable questions. What drew Han to Heidegger? Perhaps the attention to being rather than beings, to the fundamental question of existence that modern life covers over. Perhaps the critique of technology and modernity, the sense that something essential is lost in the transformation to industrial society. Perhaps the emphasis on dwelling on authentic existence, on the difference between calculative thinking and contemplative thinking. Heidegger diagnosed modern life as characterized by forgetfulness of being. We're so absorbed in dealing with particular entities, so focused on utility and efficiency that we lose touch with the basic fact of existence itself. Modern technology, in Heidegger's analysis, is not neutral tool but framework that shapes how we encounter reality, reducing everything to resources to be optimized. These themes would reappear in Han's mature work, transformed but recognizable. Where Heidegger worried about technology making everything standing reserve, Han would analyze how digital technology makes everything data. Where Heidegger critiqued calculative thinking's domination, Han would examine how quantification colonizes every domain of life. Where Heidegger sought authentic dwelling, Han would mourn the disappearance of rituals that create dwelling. But the path from dissertation student to published philosopher was not straightforward. Han spent years in relative obscurity, teaching, researching, developing his ideas without public recognition. His first book was published in 1996, when he was 37, not unusually late for academic philosophy, but a sign that he was not precocious, not fast-tracked, but someone who developed slowly, carefully, outside the spotlight. The years of study, reading, thinking without publishing created depth. Han absorbed not just Heidegger, but the broader German philosophical tradition: phenomenology, hermeneutics, critical theory. He read widely in French theory, Foucault, Baudrillard, Derrida, Deleuze. He engaged with Asian philosophy and aesthetics, bringing resources from his Korean background into dialogue with Western thought. By the time he began German education, the University of Freiburg, where Han arrived in the early 1980s, was not just any German university. It was the intellectual home of phenomenology, the philosophical method, developed by Edmund Husserl and transformed by his student Martin Heidegger. The very air seemed philosophical, as if being itself were slightly more available for questioning in this particular city. Phenomenology begins with the simple but radical move. Bracket the question of whether the external world exists and instead describe how things appear to consciousness. Not what things are in themselves, but how they show up in experience. This turn to experience, to the givenness of phenomena, was revolutionary. It meant philosophy need not start with abstract metaphysics or scientific reductionism, but with careful attention to how the world is actually lived. Husserl had developed phenomenology as a rigorous method, systematic description of consciousness and its objects. But Heidegger, in Being and Time, had transformed phenomenology into something stranger and more ambitious, an inquiry into the meaning of being itself. Not just how things appear to consciousness, but what it means for anything to be at all. This was the tradition Han entered. Not analytic philosophy's focus on logic and language, not pragmatism's emphasis on practical consequences, but continental philosophy's concern with existence, meaning, interpretation, the human condition. The questions were fundamental. What does it mean to exist? How is existence different from mere presence? What structures make experience possible? How does temporality constitute human being? Heidegger's Being and Time argues that human existence, what he calls Dasein, is fundamentally characterized by being toward death. We are the beings for whom our own being is a question, the beings who know we will die. This awareness of finitude structures everything: our projects, our anxieties, our attempts to understand ourselves. Most of the time, Heidegger argues, we flee this awareness. We lose ourselves in the they, das man, the anonymous public, the averaged-out mode of existence where we do what one does, think what one thinks, never really existing as ourselves. This inauthenticity is not moral failure, but existential tendency. It's easier to disappear into social roles than to confront the anxiety of existence. Authenticity acquires owning our finitude, accepting that we're thrown into a world we didn't choose, with possibilities that are limited, facing a death that's inevitable. This acceptance doesn't produce despair, but liberation, freedom to choose how to exist within the constraints we cannot escape. Han absorbed this framework deeply. His dissertation, completed in 1994, was titled Martin Heidegger, Hermeneutics of Facticity. The focus was on Heidegger's early lectures, before Being and Time, where the basic concepts were being developed. Han was interested in how Heidegger thought about existence, about the way human being is always already situated in a world, always already interpreting. The German title was Martin Heidegger, Hermeneutik der Faktisität und die Zeit. The and time is significant. Han was examining how Heidegger understood temporality, the way human existence is stretched between past, present, and future, never simply present, but always ecstatically temporal. This seems abstract, but it has concrete implications. If human being is essentially temporal, then changes in how we experience time are changes in how we exist. When time accelerates, when the present becomes eternal and disconnected from past and future, when duration disappears into pure succession, these are not just annoying features of modern life, but transformations of existence itself. Han would later develop this insight. His book, The Scent of Time, examines what he calls the atomization of time, the way duration dissolves into isolated moments, how narrative gives way to addition, how we lose the ability to experience time as flowing continuity. This analysis has roots in Heidegger's phenomenology of temporality, but transformed through observation of digital culture. Beyond Heidegger, Han engaged deeply with other German thinkers. Nietzsche's critique of morality, his genealogical method of showing how values emerge from power relations, his diagnosis of nihilism as the central problem of modernity, Hegel's dialectics, the way contradictions drive development, the structure of recognition and self-consciousness, Marx's analysis of capitalism and alienation. Though filtered through later critical theory, the Frankfurt School was particularly important. Theodor Adorno's negative dialectics, his critique of identity thinking, his analysis of how the culture industry produces conformity while seeming to offer choice. Max Horkheimer's concept of instrumental reason, the reduction of thinking to mere calculation of means to ends. Herbert Marcus's analysis of one-dimensional society, where apparent freedom masks deeper unfreedom. These thinkers shared a concern that modernity, despite its promises of liberation, produces new forms of domination. Enlightenment claims to free humanity through reason, but instrumental reason enslaves. Capitalism promises prosperity, but alienates. Democracy offers freedom, but public opinion becomes tyranny of the majority. Progress turns dialectically into its opposite. Han would inherit this critical impulse, but give it new form. Where the Frankfurt School worried about mass culture and fascism, Han analyzes digital culture and voluntary self-exploitation. Where they saw domination operating through prohibition and repression, he identifies achievement and positivity as more effective forms of control. The tradition continues, adapted to new conditions. French theory provided additional resources. Michel Foucault's analysis of power not as top-down repression, but as productive force operating through institutions, discourses, technologies of the self. Foucault showed how modern power works not primarily through saying no, but through saying yes, through encouraging certain forms of identity, behavior, desire. Discipline creates docile bodies not through punishment alone, but through training, examination, normalization. Han would push this further. If Foucault analyzed disciplinary society, Han identifies a new formation, the achievement society, where power operates not through discipline, but through initiative, not through external coercion, but through internal drive to optimize, improve, perform. Foucault's panopticon, where external surveillance produces self-regulation, is replaced by what Han calls psychopolitics, where we surveil ourselves willingly through fitness trackers, social media, quantified self-technologies. Jean Baudrillard's analysis of simulation and hyperreality informed Han's thinking about transparency and authenticity. Baudrillard argued that in postmodern society, copies without originals proliferate images that refer only to other images, simulations that precede reality. The map becomes more real than the territory. Representation replaces reality. Han extends this analysis to the contemporary obsession with authenticity. When everyone is performing authenticity, when the authentic self becomes commodity to be produced and marketed, authenticity itself becomes simulation. The more we're pressured to be ourselves, the more the self becomes performance, brand, product. Gilles Deleuze's concept of the control society following Foucault, but identifying a shift from discipline to continuous modulation resonates through Han's work. Deleuze distinguished disciplinary society in closed spaces: school, factory, prison. Where subjects are molded from control society, open systems, where subjects are continuously tracked and adjusted. Control operates through data, algorithms, modulation rather than rules and confinement. Han sees digital technology as realizing control in unprecedented ways. The smartphone that tracks our location, the algorithm that curates our feed, the credit score that follows us everywhere. These are technologies of control that don't feel controlling because they seem to serve our interests, give us what we want, increase our freedom. Through this education, Heidegger's phenomenology, Frankfurt School critical theory, French post-structuralism, Han assembled the conceptual tools for his mature work. But tools alone don't make a thinker. What made Han distinctive was how he deployed these concepts, the specific diagnoses he developed, the unusual clarity with which he described contemporary experience. By the mid-1990s, Han had completed his formal education. He had a doctorate in philosophy, deep knowledge of multiple philosophical traditions, fluency in German philosophical discourse. He began teaching lecturer positions at various universities, the contingent labor of academic philosophy. His work remained unknown outside specialized circles. Then, in 2005, something shifted. Han published a small book with the German academic press, Hyperculturalit. It examined how globalization produces not a single world culture, but proliferation of cultural forms, how difference is commodified and consumed, how the exotic becomes entertainment. The book gained little attention, but it showed Han's distinctive voice emerging short sections, aphoristic style, moving between philosophy and cultural observation. More books followed, each slim, each dense, with insight. Was unsigned 2010 Digkeitsgesellschaft, the Burnout Society. 2010, Transparenzgesellschaft, the Transparency Society, 2012. These were not traditional academic monographs, no lengthy literature reviews, no defensive footnoting, no hedged claims. They were philosophical essays in the classical sense, attempts, explorations, provocations. The breakthrough came with the Burnout Society. This book, barely 100 pages, articulated something people recognized immediately. We're not oppressed in the old sense, but exhausted in a new sense, worn down not by prohibition, but by possibility, destroyed not by what we cannot do, but by what we endlessly can. Suddenly, Han was not just another academic philosopher, but a thinker whose work mattered beyond philosophy departments. Translations multiplied, articles cited him, people discussed his concepts, achievement subject, positivity violence, transparency tyranny, as if they named real phenomena. His books became bestsellers by philosophy standards, discussed in newspapers and magazines, assigned in courses across disciplines, yet Han himself remained largely invisible. Few interviews, minimal public presence, no social media. For a philosopher diagnosing the problems of exposure and self-promotion, this restraint seemed consistent, practicing what he preached, refusing the game he critiqued. Between worlds, to be between cultures is to belong fully to neither. The person who has emigrated carries the origin, but cannot return to it unchanged. The person who has learned a new language and culture knows it deeply, but differently than natives. This in-between position, uncomfortable and disorienting, can produce unusual clarity. Han's position as a Korean-born philosopher writing in German about Western culture creates a particular angle of vision. He is not tourist making superficial observations about strange foreign customs. He has lived in Germany longer than he lived in Korea, has spent decades studying German philosophy, writes in German with philosophical sophistication. Yet he maintains the perspective of someone who came from outside, who learned this culture deliberately rather than absorbing it unconsciously. This matters for how he sees. The native takes their culture for granted. It's the water they swim in, invisible because it's everywhere. The complete outsider sees only surfaces, lacks the depth to understand. But someone who has learned a culture thoroughly while retaining memory of a different cultural logic can see both the culture and its contingency, both what it is and what it might be otherwise. Korean culture, despite its modernization and democratization since Han's youth, retains elements that contrast sharply with Western individualism. The emphasis on social harmony over individual expression, the importance of ritual and ceremonial forms, the concept of we as primary and I as derivative, the comfort with hierarchy and rule-based behavior, the value placed on restraint, indirection, reading situations rather than demanding explicit communication. These are generalizations. Of course, Korea is diverse, changed, not reducible to simple contrasts. But the Confucian cultural heritage that shaped Korean society for centuries emphasized different values than the liberal individualism that dominates the West. Duty over rights, harmony over freedom, collective good over personal autonomy, ritual propriety over authentic expression. When Han critiques Western individualism, the narcissism of authenticity, the loss of ritual, he's not speaking from nowhere. He's drawing on lived experience of a culture that organizes itself differently, that achieves Things Western individualism struggles with: social cohesion, shared meaning, spaces of collective ritual, while having its own problems and limitations. The Confucian tradition emphasizes self-cultivation, but toward harmony with social roles, rather than discovery of unique individual essence. You become fully yourself not by expressing your authentic individuality, but by perfecting your relationships as child to parent, student to teacher, citizen to community. The self is relational, constituted through roles, finding fulfillment in performing these roles well rather than transcending them. This is alien to Western thought, especially in its modern liberal form. From Rousseau through Romanticism to contemporary identity politics, the West has increasingly valued authenticity, being true to your real self, expressing your unique identity, refusing to conform to social expectations that aren't genuinely you. The demand is not to perfect your role, but to discover and express your essence. Han sees both the appeal and the pathology of Western authenticity. The appeal: refusal of arbitrary authority, space for individuality, protection of difference. The pathology: the self becomes burden. Authenticity becomes performance. The demand to be yourself produces anxiety rather than liberation. When everyone must discover their unique identity and brand themselves accordingly, authenticity becomes just another form of work. Moreover, authenticity presumes there's a true self to discover. But what if the self is not essence but process? Not discovery, but construction. The Confucian view that self is constituted through relationships may be more accurate than the liberal view that self precedes relationships. We don't have authentic selves that we then express in relationships. We become selves through relationships. This cultural perspective allows Han to question what Western thought takes for granted. When he argues that hyper-individualism produces isolation and narcissism, he's not just making philosophical argument, but drawing on awareness of how differently sociality can be organized. When he mourns the loss of ritual, he knows from experience how ritual creates shared meaning and community. When he critiques the authenticity imperative, he's seen an alternative where role and ritual structure life. Yet Han is not advocating return to Confucian culture or romanticizing Korean society. His work shows awareness of authoritarianism's dangers, hierarchical oppression, the way traditional culture can suffocate. The point is not that Korean culture is better, but that the comparison reveals how Western culture's problems are not inevitable features of modern life, but consequences of particular choices. The position between cultures also creates philosophical distance from both. Han can critique Western individualism without defending Confucian collectivism. He can identify problems with Korean authoritarianism without embracing Western liberalism solutions. This double distance creates space for thinking that's not simply accepting either culture's assumptions. Language itself shapes this position. Han writes in German, thinks philosophically in German, has absorbed the German philosophical tradition thoroughly. German philosophy has particular characteristics: systematic ambition, conceptual precision, historical consciousness, depth over clarity. To write philosophy in German is to write in a language shaped by Kant, Hegel, Heidegger, a language where abstract nouns pile up, where compound words create new concepts, where philosophical rigor is expected. Yet Han's German, while fluent and sophisticated, is learned German. He doesn't have the native speaker's unconscious mastery, the idioms absorbed in childhood, the cultural references that need no explanation. This creates a slight alienation from the language, a gap that might produce either awkwardness or precision. In Han's case, it seems to produce precision. His sentences are clear, controlled, stripped of unnecessary flourish. The language serves the thought rather than the thought getting lost in linguistic play. Korean philosophy and aesthetics subtly inflect Han's work, even when not explicitly referenced. Korean aesthetics values simplicity, restraint, space, the beauty of imperfection. The concept of ma, the space between things, the pause, the emptiness that gives form meaning resonates in Han's critique of information overload and loss of contemplative attention. The ability to appreciate blankness, silence, the unfinished that stands against Western culture's horror vacuuming, its need to fill every space with stimulus. Similarly, the Buddhist influence in Korean culture, the awareness of impermanence, the critique of attachment, the value of emptiness and no self provides resources for criticizing Western ego psychology and the authenticity cult. If the self is not stable essence, but impermanent process, then the search for authentic self is misconceived. If attachment causes suffering, then consumer culture's cultivation of endless desire is systematically producing unhappiness. Han doesn't write as Buddhist philosopher, he's working in German continental tradition, not Asian philosophy. But the resonances are there, informing his perspective. When he writes about the violence of positivity, about burnout resulting from the achievement imperative, about the need for negative capability and contemplative distance, he's drawing on resources that aren't native to Western thought. The question of belonging haunts anyone between cultures. Where is home? In the place you came from, but have outgrown. In the place you've chosen, but remain always somewhat foreign. In the space between, belonging fully to neither. Han seems to have made peace with this homelessness, perhaps even found it philosophically productive. His books rarely reference Korea directly. He's not writing as Korean philosopher interpreting Western culture for Korean audience or explaining Korean wisdom to Western readers. He writes as philosopher analyzing contemporary conditions that exist in Seoul as much as Berlin, in Tokyo as much as New York. The burnout society, transparency tyranny, digital exhaustion are not Western problems, but problems of global modernity, wherever capitalism and technology combine to accelerate life beyond sustainable pace. Yet his perspective remains distinctive precisely because he came from outside, learned Western culture deeply, but differently, maintains double consciousness that allows him to see what natives cannot see. This is the gift of displacement. If you can bear the loneliness and loss, the never fully belonging, you gain angle of vision that monolingual monoculture cannot achieve. Han's productivity is remarkable. Since 2010, he has published more than 15 books, slim volumes, densely argued, each addressing different aspects of contemporary pathology. The Transparency Society, The Agony of Eros, Psychopolitics, The Expulsion of the Other, The Disappearance of Rituals, Capitalism and the Death Drive, Undinge. Each book takes an aspect of contemporary life and subjects it to philosophical analysis, revealing the structure underneath the surface. The writing is aphoristic, moving in short sections rather than sustained argumentation. Each section, often just a page or two, makes a single point, develops a single observation, pursues a single thought. The effect is cumulative. The book builds not through linear argument, but through accumulation of insights that circle and reinforce each other. This style reflects the content. Han is diagnosing fragmentation, the loss of narrative continuity, the reduction of experience to isolated moments, the inability to sustain attention or construct meaning over time. To write in long, developmental chapters might seem to contradict this diagnosis. The short, discrete sections enact the condition they describe while also offering resistance. Each section is complete, contemplative, refusing the acceleration it analyzes. Critics note the repetition across books. Certain themes, certain formulations, certain examples reappear in book after book. This could be seen as failure, the philosopher who keeps saying the same thing, who hasn't developed beyond initial insights. But it might also be deliberate strategy, circling the same problems from different angles, insisting on their persistence, refusing to pretend they're resolved. The Achievement Society, the violence of positivity, the dictatorship of transparency, the disappearance of rituals, the digital swarm. These are not separate problems, but interconnected aspects of a single transformation. To address them requires not single breakthrough, but sustained attention, multiple approaches, persistence in the face of complexity. Han has found institutional position that allows his work. He's professor at the Berlin University of the Arts, teaching philosophy and cultural studies. The University of the Arts is not traditional philosophy department, it's art school, where philosophy serves art practice rather than being pursued for its own sake. This position gives Han freedom from some academic pressures while providing security in students, yet he remains marginal to mainstream academic philosophy. He doesn't publish in prestigious philosophy journals, doesn't engage in technical debates, doesn't cite extensively or position his work carefully within scholarly conversations. His books are published by small presses, marketed as cultural criticism as much as philosophy, read by wider audience than most academic philosophy, but dismissed by some professional philosophers as insufficiently rigorous. This marginality seems not to bother him. Perhaps it's even enabling freed from academic specialization. He can write for broader audience, address urgent questions, synthesize insights from multiple domains. The question is not whether his work satisfies philosophy professors, but whether it illuminates contemporary experience, whether it helps people understand the exhaustion they're living through. Burnout Society, the Burnout Society, published in German in 2010 as Digkeitsgesellschaft, literally Fatigue Society, articulated something that seemed obvious once said, but had not been clearly formulated. We have moved from a disciplinary society organized around prohibition to an achievement society organized around possibility. And this shift, despite appearing liberating, produces new and worse forms of suffering. The book opens with a stark claim: the immunological paradigm that structured 20th century medicine, politics, and philosophy no longer applies. The immunological model presumes threat comes from outside viruses, enemies, foreigners against which we must defend. But contemporary suffering is not immunological. It results not from external attack, but from internal excess. Too much positivity, too much stimulus, too much possibility, too much of the same. Han calls this neuronal rather than immunological violence. Depression, ADHD, burnout, these are not caused by external pathogens, but by hyperactivity, hyperattention, exhaustion of the self by the self. The violence is self-inflicted, but this doesn't make it less real. Indeed, self-inflicted violence is harder to resist because there's no clear enemy, no external force to oppose. Michel Foucault analyzed the disciplinary society, the society of hospitals, schools, prisons, factories where subjects are molded through surveillance, examination, normalization. The disciplinary society says, you should obey rules, fulfill duties, stay within bounds. It operates through prohibition, punishment, external control. The paradigmatic subject is the obedient subject who has internalized the rules. But Foucault, writing in the 1970s, was describing a society already being transformed. By the late 20th century, neoliberal capitalism was creating different structures. Not prison cells, but networks. Not prohibition, but initiative. Not, you should, but, you, nah. Discipline, but achievement. The paradigmatic subject is no longer the obedient subject, but the achievement subject, entrepreneurial, flexible, optimized, constantly improving. This transformation appears liberating. The achievement society promises freedom. You can be anything, do anything, realize your potential. No external master tells you what to do. You choose your own goals, pursue your own projects, create your own life. Autonomy replaces subordination. Self-realization replaces conformity. But Han reveals the dialectic. Freedom transforms into new form of coercion. The achievement subject is not more free, but more effectively exploited. The disciplinary subject could blame the master, could resist external authority, could eventually satisfy demands and rest. The achievement subject has no external master to resist, cannot rest because there are always more possibilities to realize, and experiences failure not as oppression, but as personal inadequacy. This is the genius and horror of achievement society. It has internalized domination. We are simultaneously master and slave, exploiter and exploited. We drive ourselves harder than any external authority could. We surveil ourselves more thoroughly than any panopticon. We experience exhaustion as personal failure rather than structural violence. The achievement subject says, yes, I can, the seemingly positive affirmation that becomes pathological imperative. I can work hard, achieve more, optimize better, realize more potential. The possibilities are endless, which means the work is endless. There is no point of completion, no moment when enough is enough. The goal perpetually recedes: more productivity, more achievement, more self-improvement. Han identifies the violence of positivity as distinctive feature of achievement society. This is counterintuitive. We're accustomed to thinking of violence as negative, as prohibition and repression. But positivity can be violent too. The constant demand to be happy, productive, optimize, authentic. This produces exhaustion precisely because it cannot be resisted in the same way negative commands can be resisted. You can rebel against prohibition. You can refuse to obey, can fight the master, can resist negative commands. But how do you resist possibility? How do you fight against freedom? How do you refuse optimization when it's supposedly for your own benefit? The achievement subject experiences not external oppression, but internal compulsion, the feeling that they should be achieving more, the guilt of unused potential, the anxiety of not being good enough. Depression and burnout are the signature pathologies of achievement society. Not the melancholy that results from loss, not the depression that comes from external trauma, but a depletion that comes from constant achievement pressure. The person suffering burnout has not been oppressed by external authority. They've been working freely, pursuing their own goals, exercising their agency. Yet they're exhausted, empty, unable to continue. Han describes this as violence the achievement subject inflicts on themselves. The burnout victim has been their own slave driver, internalizing productivity demands, pushing beyond sustainable limits, refusing rest because rest is unproductive. The violence is systemic. Achievement society structures things so that self-exploitation appears voluntary, but it's experienced as personal failure. The phenomenon is widespread. Burnout is recognized as a medical condition, though debate continues about whether it's distinct diagnosis or symptom of depression. Regardless of classification, the experience is real and common. Professionals who worked obsessively, achieved success, then found themselves unable to continue, exhausted beyond recovery through vacation, unable to care about work that once mattered, feeling empty despite external accomplishment. The paradox is that burnout often affects the most dedicated, the most capable, the most achievement-oriented, not those who slack off, but those who push hardest. The very qualities that produce success, discipline, dedication, the capacity to defer gratification and work extremely hard, become self-destructive when there's no natural stopping point, no completion of the project, no satisfaction of having achieved enough. Traditional Marxist analysis cannot fully explain this. Marx described alienation, the worker separated from the product of their labor, controlled by the capitalist who owns the means of production, reduced to replaceable cog in system. But the achievement subject often owns their labor, controls their process, even owns the business. The entrepreneur is exemplary achievement subject. They're not alienated in Marx's sense, yet still exhausted, exploited, suffering. The difference is that capitalist extraction has become more sophisticated. Why pay managers to supervise when workers will supervise themselves? Why force people to work when they'll work voluntarily, even obsessively? Why impose discipline from outside when achievement subjects will discipline themselves more effectively? The achievement society has discovered that freedom is more productive than coercion, not because people don't work in freedom, but because they work harder. The digital economy amplifies this. Knowledge workers can work anywhere, anytime, making the boundary between work and leisure porous. The laptop in the bedroom, the phone that never turns off, the email that arrives at midnight. These technologies promise freedom, work from anywhere, but produce surveillance and availability demands. You're never off the clock because the office is everywhere. Moreover, knowledge work is never clearly complete. Unlike industrial production where you can count widgets, knowledge work is inherently open-ended. The code could be more elegant, the presentation more polished, the analysis deeper. The perfectionism that achievement society cultivates means work is never done. There's always more that could be achieved, always another level of excellence to pursue. The injunction to be yourself, to follow your passion, to do what you love, integrates even more of life into the achievement logic. If work is self-realization, then not working is not realizing yourself. If you're following your passion, then exhaustion is your fault. You're not passionate enough. If you love what you do, then boundaries between work and life dissolve. Why stop doing what you love? This colonization of the self by work logic is achievement society's deepest violence. Not just your time, but your identity becomes invested in achievement. You are what you accomplish. Your worth is measured by productivity. Your existence is justified by output. When work is identity, burnout is not just exhaustion, but existential crisis, the collapse of the self. Han argues that achievement society produces a peculiar form of tiredness, the tiredness that results from hyperactivity, from never stopping, from constant stimulation and production. This is different from the tiredness that comes from physical labor, which at least carries satisfaction of having worked with body and completed concrete tasks. Achievement tiredness is never satisfied because the work is never complete. He distinguishes this from what he calls profound tiredness, the tiredness that has contemplative quality, that opens rather than closes, that creates space rather than filling it. Profound tiredness is not pathological, but potentially healing. The exhaustion that forces pause, that breaks the cycle of constant doing, that allows something other than achievement to emerge. But achievement society cannot access profound tiredness because it cannot truly rest. Rest becomes recovery. Time off is justified only as preparation for more work. Vacation is for recharging batteries. Sleep is optimization of performance. Even mindfulness meditation is marketed as productivity tool. Meditate to focus better, to work more effectively, to achieve higher performance. The self-help industry, the wellness movement, The optimization culture, these don't resist achievement society, but extend it into previously non-colonized domains. Now, you must optimize your sleep, your diet, your relationships, your mental health. Self-care becomes another achievement task, another domain for measurement and improvement. The quantified self tracks everything, turns life into data, makes even bodily existence subject to achievement logic. What's lost is anything that exists for its own sake, rather than as means to achievement. Play becomes skill development, hobbies become side hustles, friendships become networking, reading becomes personal development. Every activity must justify itself through productivity, growth, optimization. The category of the useless activities valuable despite producing nothing disappears. Han's diagnosis resonates because it names something widely experienced. The person reading productivity blogs while exhausted. The professional who has achieved everything they aimed for yet feels empty. The student who optimizes every hour, yet never stops feeling behind. The parent who treats childcare as project management. The exhausted achiever who cannot understand why success feels like failure. The book's slimness, barely 100 pages, is itself significant. Han does not belabor the diagnosis with endless examples and qualifications. He states the thesis clearly, develops it concisely, leaves readers to recognize their own experience. The brevity respects readers' time appropriate for book diagnosing exhaustion, while the density requires careful reading, contemplative attention rather than rapid consumption. Critics note what the book doesn't do, offer solutions, prescribe alternatives, provide roadmap for resistance. Han diagnoses but doesn't cure, describes the pathology but doesn't write the treatment plan. This can seem frustrating if the problem is so serious. Where are the answers? But perhaps diagnosis is already valuable. To name the condition, to show its structure, to reveal that individual exhaustion has collective cause, this is not nothing. The achievement subject experiencing burnout tends to blame themselves, experience their exhaustion as personal failure. To understand it as structural problem, as effective achievement society rather than individual inadequacy, is already liberating. Moreover, any prescribed solution risks becoming another achievement task. Now, you must resist achievement society, must practice radical rest, must develop capacity for profound tiredness. The very impulse to immediately solve the problem, to turn diagnosis into action plan, to make resistance into project, this impulse is itself part of what needs questioning. Transparency's tyranny. 2 years after the Burnout Society, Han published The Transparency Society, another slim book diagnosing another contemporary pathology. Where the first book analyzed achievement and exhaustion, this one examined exposure and the demand for total visibility. Transparency has become our era's supreme value. Democracy requires transparency. Governments must be accountable. Decisions must be visible. Power must be open to scrutiny. Markets require transparency. Information must be available. Prices must be discoverable. Transactions must be trackable. Relationships require transparency. Authentic communication means exposing yourself. Intimacy means total disclosure. Trust requires visibility. The rhetoric of transparency is relentlessly positive. Transparency fights corruption, exposes wrongdoing, enables informed choice. Secrecy is suspicious. Privacy is hiding something. Opacity is potentially malicious. The demand is everywhere. Make yourself visible. Expose your processes, share your data, prove you have nothing to hide. Han's contrarian claim, transparency is not liberating but oppressive, not democratizing but totalitarian, not authentic but pornographic. The society of transparency is society where nothing remains internal, where interiority is eliminated, where mystery and otherness are expelled. The logic of transparency treats everything as available for inspection, quantification, data extraction. Persons become profiles, experiences become data points, lives become streams of shareable content. The requirement is total exposure. Your location, your purchases, your communications, your preferences, your body metrics, your mood variations, all captured, tracked, analyzed. Social media exemplifies this. The platforms encourage constant self-exposure. Share your thoughts, post your photos, broadcast your location, live stream your life. The justification is connection and authenticity. You're being your true self, showing what you're really like, connecting genuinely with others. But the reality is performance and surveillance. You're producing content, generating data, making yourself visible for evaluation. The quantified self movement takes this further. Track your steps, monitor your sleep, log your calories, measure your productivity, record your moods. Every aspect of life becomes data. The self becomes transparent to itself, no hidden corners, no unmeasured experiences, no data-free existence. This is sold as self-knowledge and self-improvement, but it's actually elimination of interiority, the self reduced to what can be quantified and displayed. Han argues that transparency destroys trust rather than enabling it. Real trust, he claims, requires opacity, the ability to relate without total disclosure, to accept that others have interiority we cannot access, to maintain relationship despite uncertainty. When everything must be verified, when trust requires proof, when confidence demands evidence, this isn't trust, but surveillance. The therapeutic culture of total honesty. The relationship advice that insists on complete transparency. The notion that authentic intimacy means sharing everything. This eliminates the distance necessary for genuine relation. When nothing can remain private, when all must be disclosed, when interiority must be constantly externalized, the other person becomes transparent, which means they cease to be other, become instead extension of oneself. Han uses the term pornographic for this culture of exposure. Pornography makes everything visible, eliminates all mystery, reduces persons to surfaces available for consumption. It's not about sexuality specifically, though sexual imagery is paradigmatic, but about the logic of total visibility that leaves nothing to imagination, interpretation, or contemplation. The workplace exemplifies transparency's violence. Open offices where everyone is visible to everyone. Constant communication that creates permanent availability. Performance metrics that quantify every activity. Surveillance technologies that track productivity minute by minute. The rhetoric is efficiency and collaboration, but the reality is elimination of any space that isn't colonized by visibility and measurement. This connects to the achievement society analysis. Transparency enables self-surveillance and peer surveillance that drive achievement pressure. When your productivity metrics are visible to everyone, when your Slack status shows exactly when you're active, when your contributions are publicly tracked, you surveil yourself, push yourself to match or exceed others' visible performance. Transparency makes the panopticon perfect because visibility is total and continuous. The political implications are complex. Transparency seems democratic. Citizens should see what governments do. Corporations should be accountable. Power should be visible. Han doesn't defend opacity of corrupt institutions, but he argues that the transparency demand goes too far, eliminates necessary spaces of discretion, reduces political action to what can be made visible immediately. Politics requires some opacity, negotiation, compromise, the space to change your mind without immediate public accountability. These need distance from total visibility. When every statement is recorded, every meeting transparent, every deliberation open to immediate judgment, politics becomes performance, gesture, positioning for cameras rather than actual negotiation of differences. Moreover, transparency favors certain kinds of information. Numbers are transparent. You can display metrics, track data, produce graphs. Qualitative understanding is opaque. It requires interpretation, admits ambiguity, resists reduction to displayable information. The more we demand transparency, the more we privilege the quantifiable over the meaningful, the measurable over the significant. This connects to what Han calls datism, the faith that big data reveals truth, that aggregating information produces understanding, that transparency through data solves problems. But data is not meaning. Information is not knowledge. Visibility is not insight. The vast accumulation of transparent data can obscure rather than reveal, drowning signal in noise, mistaking correlation for understanding, reducing complexity to patterns and data. The economic dimension is crucial. Transparency serves capital by making everything available for commodification and control. When your data is extracted, your behaviors tracked, your preferences monitored, you become transparent to systems that use this transparency for profit. The rhetoric of personalization masks surveillance capitalism. The algorithms don't serve you. You serve the algorithms by making yourself transparent. Han identifies the selfie as emblematic image of transparency society. The endless self-photographs, constantly posted, seeking validation through visibility. This seems narcissistic, but Han argues it's actually elimination of self. The self becomes pure surface, image to be consumed, brand to be marketed. The more you expose yourself, The less self there is, interiority empties out into exteriority, substance dissolves into appearance. The authenticity culture participates in transparency logic. Be your true self. Express your genuine feelings. Share your real struggles. This seems like refusal of pretense and masks, but when authenticity must be performed publicly, when the real you must be constantly displayed, when genuine self must be brand, authenticity becomes another form of transparency, another elimination of interiority. Han's concept of the smooth is important here. Transparency makes everything smooth, eliminates rough edges, differences, resistance. A smooth surface is one where nothing catches, nothing resists, everything flows frictionlessly. This seems positive efficiency, optimization, ease. But smoothness eliminates otherness. The smooth surface has no texture, no depth, no place for encounter with what is genuinely different. Beauty requires some opacity, Han argues. The beautiful object is not fully graspable, not entirely transparent to understanding. It maintains mystery, requires contemplation, resists reduction to information. When everything is transparent, beauty becomes impossible, only the interesting remains, the stimulating, the novel, what catches attention momentarily before the next stimulus arrives. The same with persons. The other person, to remain other, must retain some opacity, must be not entirely knowable, not fully transparent to your understanding, not reducible to the data you've collected about them. When relationship requires total transparency, the other becomes same extension of yourself, mirror rather than genuinely different person. This connects to what Han calls the expulsion of the other in other books theme. Contemporary society cannot tolerate genuine otherness, cannot accept what is truly different, and therefore potentially disturbing. Everything must be made same smooth, transparently understandable, used to familiar categories. Difference is celebrated in superficial form, diversity as aesthetic, multiculturalism as cuisine, while genuine alterity is eliminated. Digital culture accelerates this. Algorithms curate your feed to show you what you already like. Echo chambers insulate you from different perspectives. The quantified, datafied, transparently measured world reduces difference to variations within sameness, everything measured on same scales, everything rendered comparable, everything made transparent to same logic. The question Han doesn't fully answer: is resistance possible? Can we refuse transparency without becoming suspicious, secretive, hiding wrongdoing? Can we maintain opacity without reactionary defense of illegitimate privilege? Can we preserve mystery and interiority while still having accountability and connection? Perhaps the answer is paradoxical. We need both transparency and opacity, both exposure and privacy, both visibility and mystery. Not total transparency, which becomes totalitarian, not total secrecy, which enables abuse, but selective transparency, clarity about certain things, opacity about others, wisdom to distinguish what should be open from what should remain interior. This requires judgment, which means it resists rules. We cannot have an algorithm for when to be transparent and when to maintain privacy. We cannot reduce to principle what requires practical wisdom. This itself resists transparency. Logic, the answer, cannot be made fully explicit, cannot be reduced to procedure, cannot be transparently determined. Han's slim book doesn't prescribe solutions. It diagnoses, describes structure, names the condition. The reader who recognizes themselves in the diagnosis, who feels the exhaustion of constant self-exposure, who experiences social media as burden rather than joy, who resents the quantified self while participating in it, has at least gained clarity about what's happening. Profound boredom. In a short book called The Scent of Time, Han explores what might seem a minor topic: boredom. But for Han, boredom is not trivial. It's a fundamental mode of attention, now almost extinct, whose disappearance has profound consequences for how we experience time and reality. Boredom has terrible reputation. It's what we avoid, what we escape through entertainment and distraction. To be bored is negative state, pointless, unpleasant, unproductive. The smartphone in every pocket exists partly to eliminate boredom. Whenever a moment threatens emptiness, we can scroll, check, consume, fill the space. Han distinguishes superficial from profound boredom. Superficial boredom is restless, uncomfortable, seeking stimulus and novelty. It's the boredom you feel waiting in line, sitting through bad lecture, trapped in uneventful situation. This boredom craves entertainment, wants something to happen, cannot tolerate emptiness. But profound boredom is different. Han draws on Heidegger's phenomenology of boredom from the fundamental concepts of metaphysics lectures. Heidegger identified profound boredom as state where time becomes apparent not as sequence of moments to be filled, but as duration, as stretching, as opening. In profound boredom, you're not seeking distraction, but experiencing time's own movement, its peculiar quality of both passing and standing still. This sounds abstract. Concretely, profound boredom is what you might experience on a long train journey with nothing to do, no phone to check, no book to read, just sitting as landscape passes. At first, it's uncomfortable, the impulse to do something, to occupy yourself, to make time pass faster. But if you stay with it, if you don't immediately reach for distraction, something shifts. Time begins to feel different, longer, deeper, more substantial. In profound boredom, Heidegger argued, beings as a whole become indifferent. Not this or that thing boring you, but everything becoming equal, losing its urgency and importance. This sounds negative, but Heidegger saw it as revealing something important, the being of beings, the sheer fact that things are rather than nothing being. Usually, we're absorbed in particular concerns, engaged with specific objects. Profound boredom loosens this absorption, creates distance from immediate concerns. Han connects this to contemplation. Contemplative attention requires ability to sustain focus without seeking reward, to remain with something without demanding it be interesting, to tolerate the seemingly empty moments that precede genuine understanding. Profound boredom cultivates this capacity, the ability to wait, to endure duration, to not immediately flee toward stimulus. Contemporary culture has eliminated profound boredom. The smartphone ensures that no moment need be empty. No waiting period unpopulated by content. Whenever boredom threatens, distraction is available, infinite feed of novelty, constant stream of stimulation, entertainment on demand. We become allergic to boredom, incapable of tolerating even moments of emptiness. This seems like victory. Who wants to be bored? But Han argues we've lost something essential. Without capacity for profound boredom, we cannot contemplate. Without tolerance for duration, we cannot sustain attention long enough for depth. Without ability to endure emptiness, we remain on the surface, consuming novelty without understanding. The attention economy profits from boredom's elimination. If people could tolerate being bored, they wouldn't compulsively check their phones, wouldn't scroll endlessly, wouldn't consume content constantly. The business model requires that boredom be intolerable, that every empty moment be immediately filled with advertiser-supported content, that attention never rest. Han connects this to what he calls hypertension, the scattered, fragmented, constantly shifting attention that characterizes digital culture. Hypertension moves rapidly between stimuli, never resting on anything long enough for depth, always seeking novelty. It's the opposite of contemplative attention, which sustains focus, tolerates lack of immediate reward, allows understanding to develop slowly. Hypertension is adaptation to information overload. When stimuli overwhelm, when content exceeds any possibility of processing, attention fragments as defense mechanism. You can't focus deeply because the environment demands you monitor multiple streams simultaneously. The result is superficiality, constant exposure without understanding, endless consumption without integration. Children diagnosed with ADHD might be experiencing not individual pathology, but structural condition. They cannot sustain attention not because something is wrong with them, but because the environment systematically fragments attention. The classroom requires contemplative attention, sitting still, focusing on material that's not immediately entertaining, tolerating boredom as understanding develops. But children raised in hypertensive environments cannot do this, not because they're disabled, but because they're adapted to different attentional logic. The response is often pharmaceutical, medicate children so they can focus. Han suggests this treats symptom while ignoring cause. The problem is not the children, but the environment that fragments attention, the culture that cannot tolerate profound boredom, the systems that demand hypertension. The connection to achievement society is clear. Achievement requires hypertension, monitoring multiple tasks, responding to constant demands, switching rapidly between projects. Contemplative attention is unproductive. It doesn't generate immediate results, doesn't multitask efficiently, doesn't maximize output. Achievement society systematically selects for hypertension and against contemplation. But important things require contemplative attention. Understanding complex ideas, creating meaningful work, developing genuine relationships, Cultivating wisdom, these cannot be achieved through hypertension. They require duration, sustained focus, tolerance for periods when nothing seems to be happening. They require, in other words, capacity for profound boredom. Han connects boredom to narrative capacity. Narrative requires duration, the ability to connect beginning, middle, and end into coherent story, to experience time as having structure and meaning rather than as mere succession. But hyperattention destroys narrative. Each moment is isolated, disconnected from what came before and what comes after. Life becomes series of present moments rather than story with arc and significance. This is not just aesthetic loss. Narrative capacity is essential for identity, for ethics, for politics. Personal identity requires narrative, the ability to understand your life as coherent story connecting past and future. Ethics requires narrative, understanding actions as having consequences that unfold over time, recognizing patterns of behavior as constituting character. Politics requires narrative, seeing present as connected to history and future, understanding events as part of larger trajectories. Without narrative capacity, we're trapped in eternal present, each moment isolated, disconnected from meaning that requires temporal extension. This is precisely what digital culture produces: the feed of isolated moments, the stream of disconnected content, the perpetual present that has no depth or duration. Han also connects boredom to freedom. Genuine freedom requires space, temporal space to think, emotional space to feel, experiential space to encounter otherness. But contemporary culture eliminates all space, fills every gap, allows no emptiness. The result is claustrophobic constant stimulus, continuous presence, no room for anything unexpected to emerge. Profound boredom creates space. In the empty moments, in the waiting without distraction, in the tolerance of nothing happening, space opens where something genuinely new might appear. Not the novelty of the next stimulus, which is just more of the same, but genuine novelty, the truly unexpected, what couldn't be anticipated because it doesn't fit into existing categories. This is why contemplative traditions cultivate boredom. Meditation is deliberately boring, sitting still, focusing on breath, not seeking entertainment or stimulation. The point is not to enjoy boredom, but to develop capacity to tolerate it, to remain present even when nothing interesting is happening. This capacity then extends to the rest of life, the ability to be with things as they are rather than always seeking something more stimulating. But such cultivation is almost impossible in digital environment. Even if you personally decide to cultivate boredom, the environment conspires against you. The phone vibrates with notifications. The laptop beckons with its infinite content. Other people's constant connection makes your disconnection feel like absence, like you're missing something, like you're failing to participate. This is the paradox. We know, intellectually, that constant stimulation is exhausting, that hyperattention is superficial, that we've lost something important. Many people try to resist digital detoxes, phone-free weekends, meditation retreats, but these remain exceptions, temporary escapes from default condition. They're treated like vacations from real life, rather than what real life should be. Moreover, the attempts to resist often become achievement tasks. Now, you must optimize your attention, cultivate your boredom, practice your contemplation. The resistance gets absorbed into achievement logic, becoming one more domain for self-improvement and optimization. You track your meditation minutes, gamify your digital disconnection, measure your boredom tolerance. Han doesn't offer solutions in the sense of practical techniques. He's not writing self-help, not prescribing digital detox protocols, not providing contemplation training programs. He's diagnosing structural condition, showing how the elimination of profound boredom is not accidental but systematic, not individual failure, but cultural transformation. The question remains, can profound boredom be recovered? Can we recreate conditions where contemplative attention is possible? Can we resist hypertension's colonization of consciousness? Or is the transformation irreversible? The capacity for contemplation lost to everyone raised in digital environment? Han's pessimism suggests the latter. Not that nothing can be done, but that individual resistance cannot overcome structural conditions. If the entire environment systematically fragments attention, if the economic system requires hypertension for its functioning, if the culture has lost even the concept of contemplative depth, then personal practice of profound boredom becomes increasingly difficult, eventually perhaps impossible. Yet the diagnosis itself has value. To understand that your inability to focus is not personal failure, that your fragmented attention is not individual pathology, that your longing for depth is not nostalgia, but recognition of genuine loss. This provides clarity. The exhaustion you feel is real. The superficiality you experience is not imagined. The sense that something essential has been lost is accurate. Disappearing other. One of Han's most provocative claims appears in his book, The Expulsion of the Other. Contemporary society, he argues, can no longer tolerate genuine otherness. We have eliminated the other, the truly different, the strange, the foreign, and created a world of the same. This claim seems obviously false. We celebrate diversity, promote multiculturalism, value difference. Contemporary liberal societies pride themselves on tolerance, inclusion, acceptance of otherness. How can Han claim the other has been expelled? His argument is subtle. The difference we celebrate is superficial aesthetic variation, cultural diversity as consumption, identity as personal brand. We embrace otherness that has been domesticated, made safe, rendered fundamentally similar despite surface variations. The genuinely other, what is strange enough to disturb, different enough to be incomprehensible, foreign enough to threaten, this we cannot tolerate. Han distinguishes the other from the different. The different is variation within sameness. You like this cuisine, I like that. You have this identity, I have that. You believe this, I believe that. But we're fundamentally the same liberal subjects, rights bearers, consumers, individuals pursuing happiness. The differences are choices within shared framework. The other, by contrast, is incommensurable, not simply different, but genuinely foreign, operating from premises you don't share, pursuing ends you don't understand, existing according to logic that's not yours. The other cannot be reduced to your categories, cannot be understood as variation on your themes, cannot be assimilated into your framework. This kind of radical otherness is what contemporary society eliminates. Through what Han calls the terror of the same, everything is made comprehensible, everything translated into familiar terms, everything reduced to variations on universal human themes. The result is a world where nothing is genuinely strange anymore, nothing radically foreign, nothing incomprehensibly other. The political implications are significant. Liberalism prides itself on tolerance, but liberal tolerance has limits. It tolerates differences that don't challenge liberal premises. You can worship any god as long as you keep it private, express any identity as long as you affirm universal rights, practice any culture as long as you accept procedural democracy. What liberalism cannot tolerate is a liberal otherness, cultural forms that don't recognize individual rights, religious commitments that reject secularism, communities that don't embrace liberal values. This isn't necessarily wrong. There are good reasons to defend liberal values, to reject illiberalism, to insist on certain universal principles. Han's point is not that we should embrace everything, but that we should recognize that our tolerance is limited, that our celebration of diversity is conditional, that we've created a world where genuine otherness cannot exist. The economic dimension reinforces this. Global capitalism requires commensurability. Everything must be comparable, measurable, usable to exchange value. Cultural practices, religious commitments, traditional ways of life, these must either adapt to market logic or disappear. The result is homogenization disguised as diversity, infinite variety of consumer choices within single economic framework. Tourism exemplifies this. We travel to encounter otherness, experience different cultures, see how other people live. But tourism domesticates otherness. The foreign becomes entertainment, the strange becomes commodity, the other becomes service provider for your authentic experience. The structure remains same, your customer, their provider, only the superficial content differs. Social media extends this logic. The algorithm curates your feed to show you what you'll like, what fits your interests, what confirms your beliefs. This creates echo chambers where difference is minimized, where you encounter only variations on what you already think. The other disappears into filter bubble of the same. Han uses the psychological concept of narcissism to explain this. In Freudian theory, narcissism is investment of libido in the self rather than in external objects. The narcissist cannot genuinely love others because others are not recognized as truly other. They're either extensions of the self or mirrors, reflecting the self back. Contemporary culture is structurally narcissistic, not because individuals are personally narcissistic, though many are, but because the culture cannot recognize genuine otherness. Everything is reduced to same variations on familiar themes, differences that don't disturb others who are fundamentally like us. This is painfully visible in identity politics. The rhetoric is about recognizing difference, valuing diversity, eluding the marginalized, but the logic is assimilation into sameness. Different identities are recognized as variations within single framework, where all individuals with identities to be respected, all rights bearers deserving recognition, all consumers and marketplace of identities. What cannot be recognized is genuinely different cultural logic, ways of being that don't center individual identity, communities that don't reduce to collection of individuals, practices that don't translate into liberal categories. The demand is, be different, but be different in ways we understand, ways that fit our framework, ways that don't challenge our fundamental premises. The expulsion of the other has psychological consequences. If everything is same, nothing is genuinely foreign. If otherness has been eliminated, experience becomes flat, world becomes boring, life loses depth. The encounter with genuine otherness is transformative. It challenges you, disturbs your certainties, forces recognition that your way is not the only way. Without such encounters, consciousness remains trapped in its own categories, unable to grow beyond what it already knows. Han connects this to eros, the Greek concept of desire for what you lack, longing for what is other than you. Eros requires genuine otherness. You cannot desire what is same as yourself, cannot long for what you already possess. In world where other has been expelled, eros becomes impossible. What remains is pornographic consumption, endless stimulation without genuine desire, constant novelty without real satisfaction. This affects relationships. Romantic love requires otherness. The beloved must be genuinely other, not transparent to your understanding, not reducible to what you know. But contemporary relationship culture demands transparency, requires total communication, insists partners be knowable and compatible. The dating apps quantify compatibility. The relationship advice demands total honesty. The therapeutic culture insists on communicating everything. The result is relationships of same two individuals who have verified their compatibility, eliminated mystery, made themselves transparent to each other. This is comfortable, predictable, safe. It's also boring, lacking in eros, fundamentally narcissistic. You're relating not to genuine other, but to compatible same. The political consequences are profound. Democracy requires engagement with otherness, encountering perspectives you don't share, arguments you don't accept, people who think differently. But contemporary polarization creates worlds of same, liberal echo chambers and conservative echo chambers, each internally homogeneous, each treating the other side not as genuinely different perspective, but as irrational, immoral, incomprehensible. This is not synthesis or tolerance. It's mutual expulsion. Each side has expelled the other, created bubble of same, cannot encounter genuine difference. The result is political paralysis. Since the other has been expelled, compromise becomes impossible, understanding becomes unthinkable, resolution becomes unimaginable. Han's concept of hell of the same captures this. Hell is not other people, as Sartre claimed. Hell is the same, endless repetition, elimination of otherness. World where nothing is genuinely different, nothing truly strange, nothing radically foreign. This is contemporary condition. Infinite variety within fundamental sameness, endless novelty that's never actually new, constant stimulation that's never truly surprising. The question is whether recovery is possible. Can we create conditions where genuine otherness can exist? Can we tolerate strangeness that doesn't immediately get domesticated? Can we encounter difference that actually challenges rather than simply adding another option to the menu? Han is not optimistic. The structural conditions, global capitalism's homogenization, digital platforms' algorithmic curation, world culture's intolerance of a liberalism are powerful. Individual attempts to encounter otherness get absorbed into tourism, consumption, aesthetic appropriation. The other returns as exotic commodity, strange entertainment, foreign cuisine, domesticated otherness, same disguised as different. Yet awareness itself is something. To recognize that what we celebrate as diversity is actually homogeneity, that our tolerance is conditional, that we've expelled the genuinely other. This is at least seeing clearly. The comfortable assumption that we're open and tolerant gets disturbed. The recognition that we've created world of same might prompt questioning of that world. Moreover, the diagnosis explains phenomena that otherwise seem mysterious. Why does everything feel the same despite surface variety? Why is political discourse so polarized yet so repetitive? Why do relationships feel shallow despite constant communication? Why does the world seem boring despite constant novelty? The answer: we've expelled the other, eliminated genuine difference, created hell of the same. Exhausted time itself has changed. Not objectively, clocks still measure hours and minutes identically, but phenomenologically, how we experience time has fundamentally transformed. Han's book, The Scent of Time, examines this transformation and what we've lost. Traditional societies experienced time as cyclical. Seasons returned, rituals repeated, generations succeeded each other in familiar patterns. Time had rhythm, depth, stability. The past remained present through ritual and memory. The future was anticipated continuation rather than unknown threat. Existence had duration, a thickness of time, a sense of temporal depth. Modernity linearized time. Progress replaced repetition. History became arrow pointing forward. The future became site of hope and anxiety. But this linear time still had structure, sequence, causation, narrative. Events connected to each other. The past shaped the present. The present projected toward future. Time had direction and meaning. Contemporary time is neither cyclical nor linear. Han calls it scattered, atomized, fragmented. The present moment becomes isolated from past and future. Duration dissolves into succession of unconnected points. Narrative gives way to pure addition. Time loses structure, depth, significance. What remains is eternal present, the now that has no thickness, no connection to before or after, no meaning beyond immediate stimulus. Digital culture accelerates and fragments time. Information comes in constant stream, each item replacing the previous. Nothing sustained long enough for depth. The Twitter feed, the Instagram story, the TikTok video, each is present for a moment, then disappears into stream of next content. No duration, no development, no narrative, just succession of nows. This transforms experience fundamentally. When time has duration, experience has depth. You can reflect, integrate, understand. When time fragments into isolated moments, experience becomes superficial, constant stimulus without integration, endless novelty without meaning. You consume content, but nothing accumulates into knowledge. You have experiences, but they don't form into narrative or identity. Han connects this to loss of what he calls contemplative time. Contemplation requires duration, the ability to stay with something, to return to it repeatedly, to allow understanding to develop slowly. A difficult book requires contemplative time. You read, reflect, reread, gradually penetrate meaning. A complex piece of music requires contemplative time, repeated listening, attention to structure, slow appreciation of depth. But contemporary culture systematically eliminates contemplative time. The pressure is constant novelty. The demand is immediate comprehension. The imperative is keep moving. You cannot stay with anything long enough for depth. The algorithm feeds you next content. The social pressure is to keep current. The market requires continuous consumption. This affects not just culture, but work. Work used to have rhythm, periods of intense activity, followed by completion and rest. A project would build toward deadline, you'd finish, there'd be pause before the next project. This rhythm allowed both focused effort and recovery, both achievement and rest. Contemporary work eliminates rhythm. Projects overlap, deadlines continuously arrive. Work never actually completes. There's always more email, always next meeting, always another task. The achievement imperative combines with digital connectivity to create work without end, no moment of completion, no true rest, just continuous partial attention to multiple ongoing streams. The result is what Han calls crisis of negativity. He uses negativity in philosophical sense, the ability to say no, to pause, to stop. Contemporary culture has eliminated negativity in favor of pure positivity, yes to everything, more of everything. Constant addition without subtraction, but without negativity, without the ability to stop and say no and rest, exhaustion becomes inevitable. This connects to achievement society. The achievement subject cannot rest because possibilities are endless. There's always more potential to realize, more productivity to unlock, more optimization to achieve. But this also relates to time. When time fragments into isolated moments, when there's no sense of completion, when achievement doesn't culminate, but just continues, rest becomes impossible. Han argues we've lost the Sabbath. Not necessarily religious Sabbath, but the principle of sacred time, time set apart from production and consumption, time that exists for its own sake, time when you stop working and don't feel guilty about it. Traditional societies had such time: feast days, holy days, periods when work ceased and different activities occurred. Capitalism has eliminated the Sabbath. Time becomes continuous. Work time and leisure time blur together. Vacation becomes time to recharge for work. Rest itself becomes optimization of performance. There's no time that's truly outside productive logic, no space that isn't colonized by achievement imperative. The smartphone makes this total. It accompanies you everywhere, never sleeps, constantly connects. There's no space or time that's disconnected. You can work on vacation, answer emails at midnight, consume content during every waiting moment. The boundary between work and rest, public and private, connected and disconnected, all these boundaries dissolve. This produces peculiar temporal experience. You're always working but never working, always busy but never productive, always connected but never fully engaged. Time fills with activity, but nothing seems significant. The days blur together because they lack structure. The years pass quickly because they contain no memorable events, just continuous stream of undifferentiated activity. Han uses the metaphor of scent to capture what's lost. Scent has duration, it lingers, develops, creates atmosphere. You can return to a scent in memory, and it brings back entire scene. Scent is contemplative sense. You cannot scan sense quickly, cannot multitask with smell, must stop and experience it. Scent takes time. Contemporary time has no scent. It's odorless, flat, without resonance. Events don't linger, they're immediately replaced by next event. Experiences don't develop, they're consumed as discrete units. Nothing has time to become memorable because nothing persists long enough to make impression. This affects memory and identity. Memory requires duration. Events must persist long enough to be encoded, must be retrieved and rehearsed, must connect to other memories. But when time fragments, memory weakens. The days blur together because nothing stood out. You scroll through old photos and can't remember when or why they were taken. The past becomes database rather than narrative. Identity requires narrative, the ability to connect past and future into coherent story, to understand present as meaningful moment in ongoing life. But when time fragments, narrative becomes impossible. You exist as series of present moments, each disconnected from the others, adding up to nothing more than accumulation. The question, who am I, becomes unanswerable because the I requires temporal continuity you can no longer experience. Han connects this to acceleration. Time accelerates not because there are more hours in day, but because we try to fit more into each hour. Multitasking, efficiency, constant activity. But acceleration destroys duration. When everything happens fast, nothing can develop depth. The faster time moves, the more superficial experience becomes. This is paradoxical. We accelerate to accomplish more, but acceleration prevents us from accomplishing anything meaningful. Meaningful work requires contemplative time. Deep relationships require duration. Understanding requires sustained attention. All of these become impossible in accelerated time. Yet we cannot simply choose to slow down. The structural conditions, economic competition, the technological possibility, social comparison create pressure to accelerate. If everyone else is working faster, responding instantly, maintaining constant presence, your choice to slow down feels like falling behind. Individual resistance cannot overcome structural acceleration. Moreover, even attempts to slow down get commodified. The slow movement, mindfulness industry, digital detox retreats, these become consumable products. More things to achieve, optimization strategies for managing accelerated life. They don't resist acceleration so much as help you cope with it, make you more sustainable participant in accelerated culture. Han's diagnosis is grim. Contemporary time is exhausted. Time used up and depleted. Not time that opens toward future, but time that continuously reproduces same accelerated present. Not time that allows development, but time that prevents anything from developing. Not time that creates meaning, but time that destroys meaning through fragmentation and acceleration. The political implications are significant. Politics requires temporal horizon, ability to imagine different future, to plan long-term, to sacrifice immediate benefit for later good. But fragmented, accelerated time makes this impossible. We're trapped in perpetual present, unable to imagine or work toward different future. Politics reduces to crisis management, immediate response, continuous reaction to constantly arriving present. The environmental crisis exemplifies this. Climate change requires thinking across generations, sacrificing present consumption for future sustainability, long-term planning, and commitment. But exhausted time makes such thinking almost impossible. The future is abstract. The present is pressing. The connection between present action and future consequence is invisible in fragmented time. Is recovery possible? Can we create conditions where time regains duration, where contemplation becomes possible, where narrative remerges? Han offers no clear answer. The forces fragmenting and accelerating time are powerful: technological, economic, structural. Individual practice can create islands of duration, moments of contemplation, but these remain exceptions to exhausted time rather than alternatives to it. Yet perhaps the diagnosis itself suggests something. To understand that time has changed, that what feels like personal failure to focus or rest or slow down is actually structural condition, this is already seeing differently. The exhaustion you feel is not your fault. The fragmentation you experience is not your failure. The loss of meaning is not your inadequacy, but symptom of exhausted time. Rituals' death. In the disappearance of rituals, Han examines something most people don't think about: ritual action and what happens when it vanishes. Ritual seems archaic, empty. Formalism, constraint on authentic expression. Good riddance, we might think. But Han argues that ritual's elimination produces pathologies we're only beginning to recognize. Ritual is repetitive, symbolic action performed according to established form. Religious ritual is paradigmatic liturgy repeated weekly, prayers recited in set words, ceremonies following traditional structure. But secular life also had rituals: family dinners at set times, seasonal celebrations, social conventions about greetings and gift giving, workplace traditions. Contemporary culture has eliminated most ritual. The imperative is authenticity: be genuine, express yourself, do what feels right for you. Ritual seems opposed to this. It's formal rather than authentic, traditional rather than personal, repetitive rather than spontaneous. Why perform meaningless ceremonies when you could express genuine feeling? Han's provocative claim: ritual is not meaningless formalism but essential technique for creating stability, community, and meaning. Its elimination doesn't liberate authentic expression, but produces isolation, instability, and exhaustion. Ritual creates temporal structure. Religious rituals mark time: weekly Sabbath, annual holidays, life cycle ceremonies. Secular rituals do the same: morning coffee, evening meal, weekend activities. These repetitions create rhythm, make time meaningful through cyclical return. This week is like last week, this year like last year, not as monotony, but as reassuring structure. Without ritual, time becomes formless. Days blur together because there's no structure marking them. Weeks have no rhythm because there's no repeated pattern. Years pass indistinguishably because there are no ceremonies marking transitions. The result is temporal disorientation. You lose track of time because time has no structure. Ritual also creates community. When people perform the same ritual together, they're connected through shared action. The Catholic Mass connects participants to each other and to centuries of previous participants. Family dinner rituals connect family members across generations. Workplace traditions connect colleagues across time. This connection doesn't depend on authentic feeling. You participate in ritual not because you feel like it, but because it's the ritual. Your subjective state is irrelevant. What matters is the shared action. This seems oppressive to contemporary sensibility, which privileges authentic feeling over prescribed action. But Han argues it's actually liberating. You're connected to community through action, regardless of whether your individual feelings align. Without ritual, community depends on authentic connection. You must genuinely like each other, must have compatible personalities, must feel real affinity. But such authentic connection is rare and fragile. Most relationships depend on structural connection, shared activities, repeated interactions, established patterns. When ritual disappears, these structural connections weaken, leaving only fragile authentic connections that easily dissolve. Ritual also provides meaning through symbolic action. A birthday cake with candles is ritual object. The candles symbolize years. Blowing them out symbolizes transition. The cake symbolizes celebration. This symbolism creates meaning that transcends the literal action. You're not just extinguishing candles, you're participating in meaningful ceremony. Contemporary culture is suspicious of symbolism. The demand is authenticity, real feeling rather than symbolic gesture. But symbolic action can convey what authentic expression cannot. The gesture is meaningful precisely because it's not spontaneous personal expression, but established symbolic form. The birthday candles mean something because everyone knows what they mean. The meaning exists in the shared symbol, not in your personal feelings. Without ritual symbolism, meaning becomes privatized. Each person must create their own meanings, express their own authentic self, find their own way. This sounds liberating, but produces isolation. Your meanings are yours alone, incomprehensible to others who haven't created the same personal meanings. Shared meaning requires shared symbols, which requires ritual,